Have you ever sat in a quiet room, looked around at the stillness, and thought to yourself, when did life get so quiet? Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind we welcome in the early morning light, or during a slow walk through the garden. No, I mean the kind of quiet that presses against your chest, the kind that feels like something's missing, but you can't quite name it. You reach for the phone, but no one's called. You look out the window, but the street is empty. You think of someone you might visit, but your heart whispers, would they even want to see me? That's the kind of loneliness that seeps in during our later years. And the truth is, it can feel unbearable sometimes. It's not just the absence of people. It's the absence of being seen, of being part of someone's day, of feeling like you still matter to someone's life, beyond a polite hello or a seasonal visit. For many of us, the days blur together. Meals are eaten alone. Time is passed with a television for company. Not because it's entertaining, but because it makes the silence a little more tolerable. But here's what I want to gently say to you today. Loneliness in old age is real, but it is not the end of your story. You are not meant to fade quietly into the background of your own life. You are still here, which means there is still a reason to be. And even when family is far, even when the phone stays silent, even when your world feels small, there are small, beautiful habits that can help you feel alive again. Not just busy, not just distracted, but genuinely connected, joyful, fulfilled in ways you might not have felt in years. Let me tell you about Claire. She's 78 and lives alone in a home filled with memories. Her children visit on birthdays. If they remember, her husband passed years ago. For a long time, she did the same thing every day. Got up late, turned on the television, made toast, and sat at the kitchen table, staring into the backyard. Hours passed, days passed, and with them, her spark. Until one morning, she did something different. She went outside and sat on the porch in her robe with a cup of warm lemon water. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the air was still damp. But as she sat there, a bird landed near her feet. Just for a second, long enough for her to notice it, long enough for something in her chest to flicker back on. That was the moment she started her first habit, greeting the morning, not rushing through it, not dragging herself out of bed with a sigh, but honoring it, stepping outside or standing by a window and simply noticing the color of the sky, the breath in her lungs, the stillness before the world wakes up. It became her way of saying, I'm still here. That small habit changed everything. When loneliness creeps in, it whispers that your day doesn't matter, that no one cares whether you get up or not. But when you greet the morning with intention, you interrupt that lie. You create a moment of connection with nature, with stillness, and most importantly, with yourself. The second habit that helped Claire and can help anyone who feels isolated is starting the day with motion. Not exercise, not punishment, just movement that says, I respect this body I've lived in all these years. She began with 10 minutes of gentle stretching while her tea brewed, arms reaching up, legs shaking out stiffness. Some days she did more, some days less, but the point wasn't the time. It was the gesture. You see, when your body feels ignored, your spirit often follows. And when you care for your body, even in the smallest way, your soul takes notice. It's as if you're saying, I haven't forgotten you. The third habit, and perhaps the most healing of all, is something Claire discovered by accident: intentional solitude. Not the kind of aloneness that feels empty, but the kind that feels full because you chose it. She started spending 20 minutes each day without noise. No TV, no phone, no distractions. Just her, in her favorite chair, a blanket across her lap. Breathing deeply, she called it her sacred stillness. At first, it was uncomfortable. Thoughts came rushing in. Old regrets, sadness, guilt. But she stayed with them, breathed through them, and slowly, they softened. In that quiet space, she remembered who she was beneath the years of doing and giving and grieving. That's what intentional solitude does. It reconnects you to your essence. And that connection is the antidote to suffering. Because when you're connected to yourself, you no longer feel abandoned. You feel accompanied by your own presence. These three habits, welcoming the morning, moving with care, and embracing intentional stillness, became the foundation of Claire's healing. They didn't bring her family back to her doorstep, They didn't flood her phone with messages, but they gave her back to herself. And from there, the world began to feel different. Not because it changed, but because she had, sometimes, when we begin reconnecting with ourselves, the world starts to shift in ways we didn't expect. Not because people suddenly change, but because we do. We move through our day with more presence, and that presence creates little ripples inside and out. Madeline was one of those people who never liked to sit still. For most of her life, she was in motion raising children, managing a household, caring for her parents in their final years. But after everyone moved on or passed away, she was left with an odd sense of floating. She didn't know what to do with all the stillness, and in that stillness, the loneliness became heavy. She started distracting herself: TV, puzzles, cleaning, but none of it filled her. She told me once, "I kept moving, but I wasn't going anywhere." Then one morning, she wrote down a single question in a notebook. What do I need today to feel like myself? She didn't always know the answer. Some days it was a walk. Some days it was quiet. Some days it was writing a letter she never planned to send. But asking the question became a habit, a ritual of self-care, a signal to her soul that she was still listening. That was her fourth habit: checking in with herself. We often talk about checking in with others, but we forget the importance of checking in with the person we spend the most time with: ourselves. When you ask, "What do I need today?" you're not being selfish. You're being aware. You're practicing gentle responsibility for your own well-being. And that is powerful. What came next for Madeline was unexpected. After weeks of asking herself that question, she realized something else. She wanted to create, not for anyone else, just for herself. So she picked up knitting again, something she hadn't done since her children were small. She didn't remember every stitch, but her hands remembered the rhythm, and slowly, something inside her began to warm. That's the fifth habit: doing something with your hands. Creating, gardening, baking, folding paper, painting stones. It doesn't matter what it is, or how good you are at it. The act of making something with your hands brings you into the present moment. It grounds you. It gives your energy somewhere to go. And in that doing, the loneliness has less room to grow. Owen had a similar story. After his wife died, the silence in his home was unbearable. He couldn't sit at the kitchen table without seeing her, couldn't listen to music without feeling the weight of her absence. So he started walking every day to the park near his house. At first, it was just to get out of the house. But over time, he started bringing a small bag of seeds. He'd scatter them for the birds and sit quietly on the bench. That became his ritual. The birds came to know him. Some even landed close. And while it didn't replace his wife, it gave him a sense of being known again. Not by people, but by the world, by the moment. That's what the sixth habit offers: rituals of gentle connection with nature. When you step outside and place yourself gently in the rhythm of the natural world, something begins to heal. Because nature doesn't expect anything from you. It doesn't judge your grief. It doesn't ask for your accomplishments. It simply receives you. Whether it's sitting under a tree, watching clouds pass, watering plants, or walking barefoot in the grass, nature becomes a silent friend. Always there, always welcoming. And that's the secret to these habits. They aren't about avoiding loneliness. They're about building a life that loneliness can't easily invade. They remind you that you don't need to be surrounded by people to feel full. You only need to be present and willing to tend gently to your own spirit. Henry, a quiet man in his 80s, once told me something that stayed with me. The loneliest I ever felt wasn't when I was alone. It was when I stopped talking to myself kindly. For a long time, he carried old regrets like weights. Things he wished he'd said to his children, things he wished he hadn't. He played those moments over and over in his head, until one day, during a long walk, he stopped under a tree and said aloud, "I forgive you." He wasn't talking to anyone else. He was talking to himself. That became his seventh habit: practicing daily forgiveness. Not just of others, but of his own younger self, the version of him that didn't know better. That did the best he could with what he had. Each night before bed, he would sit quietly and say, "I release what I can't carry anymore." Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he felt nothing. But over time, he noticed something shift. He slept more deeply, breathed more easily. and the shame that once sat like a stone in his chest began to lift. These habits, checking in with yourself, working with your hands, returning to nature, and practicing forgiveness, are quiet, but life-changing. They don't require youth or energy or a busy social life. They only ask for willingness, a willingness to turn toward yourself instead of away. And the beautiful thing is, once you begin, even a little something inside you wakes up. You become someone you want to spend time with again, and slowly, gently, loneliness loses its grip, because you're no longer waiting for the world to come to you. You've come home to yourself. There's a tenderness that blooms in us when we begin showing up for ourselves, not with urgency, not with desperation, but with quiet devotion. When the world slows down and the voices grow distant, it's easy to believe we've been left behind. But something sacred happens when we stop waiting to be remembered and begin remembering ourselves. Lily had lived alone for nearly 12 years after her husband passed. Her children loved her, but life was busy. Grandchildren had sports and school. Her son worked long hours. Her daughter was managing a household of her own. The visits became fewer, the calls shorter, and though Lily understood, she really did. There were days when the silence in her house felt like it had weight, but something inside her had started to shift. It began when she started humming again. Simple tunes, songs from her childhood, church hymns, the theme to a radio show long gone. She didn't sing to perform. She sang to remember her voice. And one afternoon, as she swept the kitchen floor humming "You Are My Sunshine," something in her posture changed. Her spine straightened. Her chest lifted. She was no longer fading. She was returning. That's what living from self-connection does. It doesn't necessarily draw people in with fanfare. It draws you in back into your own body, your own soul. And the beauty is, others often begin to notice. Not because you beg for their attention, but because your presence has changed. When you tend to your soul gently, daily, it becomes something people feel even if they can't explain it. A sense of ease, a kind of lightness, a steadiness that's magnetic in its own quiet way. Noah, who had spent decades in the same apartment, told me once, "I used to wait for someone to knock on my door. Now, I just open it every morning, let the light in, and let the day come to me." He didn't mean it. Metaphorically, he literally opened his front door, rain or shine, sat with his tea and his paper, waved to the mail carrier, nodded at the neighbors walking dogs, and one by one, they started waving back. A smile here, a short conversation there, a loaf of banana bread from the woman down the hall. It didn't turn into a bustling social calendar, but it reminded him that he was still part of the world. That's what presence does. It opens the door to small, meaningful connections. Not because you chase them, but because you radiate openness. Loneliness is a heavy thing, but it begins to lose its grip when we stop viewing ourselves as abandoned and start living like we belong to our days, to ourselves, to the moment, right in front of us. You don't need a house full of visitors to feel alive. You need meaning. You need movement. You need something that makes you feel like today was worth waking up for. Lucas, an ex-mechanic with a soft laugh and calloused hands, started growing tomatoes on his balcony. Not for sale, not for show, just because he liked watching something grow. "It gives me someone to talk to," he said with a grin, and the tomatoes don't interrupt. But it wasn't just the tomatoes. It was the rhythm, the tending, the act of witnessing life respond to care. And that's really what we're doing when we commit to daily habits. We're saying, I still believe in tending, even if no one else is tending to us. We tend to ourselves, our home, our heart, our spirit, and slowly, those small acts begin to fill the spaces where loneliness used to live. Sometimes, that even draws family closer again. Not because you demanded their return, but because they see something in you that feels inviting, not desperate, not bitter, just grounded. When Lily's daughter stopped by unexpectedly one Sunday afternoon, she found her mother outside, pruning lavender in the sun, her hat tipped back, her cheeks pink from the breeze. "You look so happy," she said, surprised, and Lily, smiling through her garden gloves, replied, "I am," not in the way she used to be, surrounded by noise and busy days, but in a different way. a way that came from inside. That's the restoration, not of the world outside, but of the world within. You don't need to be loud to be loved. You don't need to be needed to be worthy. And you certainly don't need to have a packed calendar to feel fulfilled. What you need is the quiet certainty that your life still matters, that your days, however simple, still hold weight, that your breath, your stories, your smile still offer something to the world. And they do, more than you know. The beauty of this stage of life is that you no longer have to prove yourself. You've already done so much, given so much, built so much. Now is the time to receive the sunlight through your window, to receive the softness of a quiet morning, to receive the joy of small routines, the miracle of blooming flowers, the comfort of your own company. This is your time to remember that being alive doesn't require applause. It only requires awareness, a hand on your heart, a deep breath, and the quiet promise to yourself, I am still here, and I will not abandon myself. If you've made it here, if you've stayed with me through these quiet moments, through the stories, through the gentle unfolding, I just want to pause and say something deeply simple.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, not just watching or listening, but showing up for yourself, for your healing, for your quiet longing to feel seen again. Because that longing, it's not weakness, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's a sign of life, of soul, of your deep capacity to feel, to connect, to want more than just passing time. And there is still more waiting for you. Not more to prove, not more to chase, but more to feel, more to create, more to savor. Maybe you're watching this with tears in your eyes. Maybe your heart feels heavy with memories. Or maybe something inside you has lit up again faint, but steady like a little lantern, remembering how to shine. Wherever you are right now, I want you to know your presence here matters, your story matters, and your life right now still holds beauty, still holds value, still holds power. The world may not always recognize your depth, but I do, and so do the many people who carry this same ache and this same quiet strength. That's why I want to gently invite you to share something in the comments below. Only if you feel comfortable. You don't need to write a lot, just something real, something honest, something human. Maybe it's a habit you've started to ease your own loneliness. Maybe it's a memory you hold close. Maybe it's a hope, however small, for what's still to come. Because here's the thing, someone else will read it. Someone else, sitting in their own quiet home, will see your words and feel a little less alone. And that is how healing spreads, not through grand speeches, but through whispered truths shared between hearts that understand each other. And if this message touched something in you, if it reminded you that your time is not over, that your soul still matters, I'd be honored if you chose to stay connected. Click subscribe if you want to walk this journey with me, not just because it helps the channel, but because I want this space to be a soft corner of the world where you always feel welcome. A place where your voice is honored, where your presence is never overlooked, where we remember, together, that loneliness doesn't have to be permanent. Because there are ways, gentle, powerful ways to hold ourselves through the silence, to rebuild meaning with our own hands, to breathe deeply into our days and say, this is my life, and I will live it with care. There's no shame in feeling lonely. The shame would be in pretending you're not still worthy of joy. And you are still worthy of beauty, still worthy of love, still worthy of waking up and finding peace in your own presence. So if today feels hard, be tender with yourself. Sit by a window, hold your tea like a ceremony, whisper to the trees if you must. Let the birds carry your unspoken feelings. You don't need a full house to feel whole. You don't need applause to know your worth. You only need a heart that is still open and a willingness to tend to it gently. Even now, especially now. So breathe, stretch, step outside, write your name in a journal, hug yourself, and know that somewhere, someone is holding this moment with you, me, and the thousands of others who feel just like you. Even if we never say it out loud, you are not alone. You are part of something quiet and strong and deeply human, and you are not done yet. Until next time, take care of yourself with warmth and with all my heart. I see you.